Hello and welcome to this edition of the Veracious Show. My name's Lorne Risley and I'm going to be your host for this episode. It's been a while. I'm so sorry. I've not really been making YouTube videos very recently for a variety of different reasons. The big one is I'm just trying to learn to shut my trap on things. I find that whenever I go down the rabbit hole of things, I get too emotively invested in certain topics and it becomes my hill to die on, when I very seldom have a dog in the fight. However, I do want to talk about something kind of generic though, so you'll forgive me if I have to lay some of the groundwork here. Recently you've seen the typical clickbaity, divisive, argumentative, question posing esque issues on social media that you tend to always see. This is not a new news story. This is not something that's fresh and amazing as an observation. What I think is interesting though is the fact that in individual circumstances this is difficult to see, but when you take a step back and you look at the way things play out on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube in the comments section or indeed any other social media website, and indeed the internet as a whole now, you're seeing it not just splintering within these social media sites, but when people leave those sites and form other sites that, again, the premise is that we all have the same idea, and yet within those you start to see splinters and factions. The interesting thing is that it seems to be the place where we as adults are almost encouraged to behave like children. I want to kind of elaborate and expand on this because I was thinking about this the other day in trying to... I am guilty sometimes of thinking I know the answer to everything. It's the reason why I often do these videos, is because I believe I know the answer to something and no one else is asking the question, which is somewhat arrogant, I understand, but nevertheless I still have these thoughts. So the initial reaction is to engage with the side that you believe is doing wrong. But then there's times where both people are in the wrong. There's times where both sides of an argument are both being stupid and, to be frank, deserve their heads banging together like children. Case in point was the MAGA kid recently. This video that seems to be cycling around, and then the counter video cycled around, and then the narratives from both sides. The kid shouldn't have been wearing the hat because he doesn't understand what it means. He should have backed off. He shouldn't have been smiling. The Native American shouldn't have been banging the drum in his face. Perhaps should have shown a bit more restraint himself, considering he's a lot older than the kid. Blah, blah, blah. To my mind, it was a lot to do about literally nothing. And the fact that both sides can't really seem to see that this, in this instance, is controversy for controversy's sake. It's interesting to me, because this is a situation where the kids are out playing and they're trying to sort through these things themselves, but they can't, because they're both in the wrong. This is when kids are cycling around two other kids chanting fight. No one's winning in this situation. It takes the adult to come in and say, what the bloody hell's going on here? Pack it in. And the kids might grumble to themselves like, oh, we had something here, and but deep down you really know that it's a good job a parent came along, or a teacher or a passerby, to make sure nothing serious happened, to make sure that there was nothing that they would later be pulled in for by their parents to say, why were you there when this happened? And it seems to me that social media, because of the ultimate anonymity that it offers, and affords people the opportunity to be as almost childlike, but in all the wrong ways as possible. And again, the MAGA kid in point. The other example was the Liam Neeson issue that occurred not too long ago. So for those that don't know, I should probably offer full context on both of these actually. But the MAGA kid's kind of passed, and you can Google it and you can see for yourself, because that made the news, as did Liam Neeson's comments. So essentially, in promoting a film called Revenge, he was in an interview and he was trying to cite an example of his life where he sought revenge. Now, the issues occurred because number one, he wasn't prompted to tell this story. Number two, the language he used could have been thought out better. I'm not going to lie to you. The problem is he almost set himself up for this and then went on an apology tour. Now, some people have alluded to the fact that this was perhaps a stunt of some description to sell the movie. Anyway, I digress. The full context. So the story went that he was how best to phrase this? A friend of his who he was very close with told him that she'd been raped by a black man. Now, he alters the story a little bit in later versions to say that he asked a number of different things about this person to try and ascertain his identity, but in his initial story, the context is that he said, what colour was he? Was it? Do you remember what he? Do you know him? No. Okay. Do you remember what he looked like? Yes. What is he? Was he? Where did he come from? He was a black man. And then he takes that information and says, I took a kosh, which is I don't know. It's I just call it a club. It's something you're gonna hit the guy with. There's nothing you're gonna stab him with or anything like that. You're gonna beat this guy. And proceeded to try and look for someone to vent his rage on. Now, specifically though, he said specifically any black man, because he felt that by doing that, that would somehow satiate his need for retribution in defending the honor of the woman that said she was raped. Now, here's where I think the conversation starts to devolve, because number one, I actually agree the fact that this point needs raising, because I refuse to believe that everyone walking God's green earth has not had a racist thought in their mind at least some point in their life, has not made some kind of dispersion, at least mentally, against someone of an easily distinguishable factor, i.e. colour, creed, religion, whatever. The difference is those who choose to act on it and those who choose to educate themselves on it. Now, as I've alluded to in a previous episode of the weekly show on the Halcyon channel, I've been victim's the wrong word entirely. I have been someone who has fell prey to this. I can't say that I haven't had ignorant thoughts in my mind. The difference is, though, that I'd like to look back and think, wow, that was stupid. Wow, that was really ignorant. And the fact is that I can now look back at that, accept my failings as a human being for casting that kind of dispersion, and acknowledge now that I hold a different philosophy, and that had I acted on those or been part of a society that would have promoted those attributes, I'd have a very different life today. I'd have very different relationships. I'd have a very different outlook on life, and I'm glad I didn't, and I'm glad that we don't live in that kind of society. Irrespective of what people might say, I genuinely believe that racism, it's certainly not something we admonish, but we have to admit that it's still there. People like to think that we don't live in a society that at least harbours racism, and I believe we do. I think that it's there, in the cracks, embedded. And the problem is that unless you admit it's there and you actively try to root it out, then you can't really ever say that you can get rid of it. I think the point he was trying to make was that in attempting to act on these thoughts, he was reduced down to a very primal instinct, in his words, to enact vengeance, i.e. linking back to his film Revenge, in a very tribal way. And it's been highlighted by a number of other people that, again, it's not uncommon for, if I was to relate it to the history of England and Scotland, when we were in different clans, different cities, different towns, different villages, you're part of a community. That community tends to ostracize people that do not come from that community, because of worries about what cultural differences they may have, that they tend to be quite, they're sneaky, untrustworthy. They don't have the same investment here. It's a very, very primitive form of racism, basically. You don't accept people that do not share your heritage. only on a village to village basis, let alone race, creed or colour, religion. This is just, you come from Rotherham town and I come from Berkshire, and therefore we are mortal enemies and we shall trade but we shall not intermingle. That was a common practice, and I think we can all look back. And sorry, the other side to that is that if someone were to be murdered by someone from an opposing village, it wouldn't matter about killing the person that did the murder. It would only matter about getting retribution on the village. They were all held accountable for that one person, so we'll kill one of yours back. Which we can all look back on now and say that's not only stupid, it's not right, it's not justice. Justice is about everyone being held accountable for their own actions, their own beliefs, sentiments and thoughts. And I think Liam Neeson was attempting to try and shine a light on the fact that in his youth and in a society that to an extent did promote violence against people that did not fit, in his case, Protestant and Catholics were murdering each other at the time. But let's all be clear, 1960s, 70s was not a good place, UK, so I'm including England in this, was not a good place for black people to live. They were exposed to racism that still lingers to this day. I don't want to hear that it's gone entirely. You can put people in adverts as much as you like. You can highlight the diversity of your company by a specific photo shoot. Great. I see the exclusion of people of ethnicity all the time, and their inclusion sometimes only serves to highlight that because they sometimes feel ostracized and they feel like they are. And I can give you a case in point. At a company that I used to work for, there was an individual who came in and he was of a different ethnicity than I would argue the majority of the office was. Now, I tried to train him as best I could. I tried to give him an insight into what I thought he needed to do to be successful. He always felt something though. He always used to tell me that, do you know what, I don't feel I'm going to get ahead here. And I said, why? He says, well, because I'm black. I don't think the owners are going to accept me. And I go, don't be ridiculous. What has that got to do with anything? Now, I was a bit younger, not too much younger than I am now, but I look back on that time and I think, maybe he had a point. I mean, maybe, I don't know. But the fact that I can't say for certain is what I think is being highlighted here. The fact that these unconscious biases that we somehow have convinced ourselves don't exist, still exist, and as a result probably do more damage in the long run than the overt racism that we've managed to at least confront to a certain degree. The overt racism still exists. You need only look further than football. One of my team that I support, Arsenal Football Club, a player by the name of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was treated, shall we say, to a banana skin thrown at him a football game. In the UK in 2019, some twat thought that was a good idea. I believe there was an arrest made, I don't know for certain, but the fact that someone in a crowd of 60 to 70,000 people with that many witnesses and with television cameras broadcasting this thing to the entire world thought that that was a reasonable course of action to take against a player he didn't like for whatever reason, chose to highlight the colour of his skin and put the exclamation point by throwing a banana skin at him, is frankly pathetic. And it's childlike. It's what it is. It's a profoundly immature and stupid thing. Liam Neeson's case served to highlight this because despite the point that he was making, people picked up on the interview almost instantly from a certain perspective and ran with it. And again, kind of like in school, how rumours get started. This kind of bullshit. Oh, so-and-so got off with so-and-so in the toilet. Why? Well, because we saw them both walking off in that general direction and they came back at the same time and he was a boy and she was a girl. So they must have had it off in the toilets. Oh, and they both said, no, it didn't happen. So that, of course, means it did happen. All sorts of urban legends that get started. Now, in this case, it's an observable fact. You can go and listen to the audio recording. And while I agree that some of the phrasing of his language was certainly suspect, and he probably could have done a bit better job in highlighting his point by not fixating on the fact that he was a black guy, his crime there was not fixating on the point that he was trying to make, which is that revenge is a stupid idea ultimately. That people can be overcome in moments of rage and extreme emotional turmoil to do things that they would not normally do because they feel they have to enact their will upon the world that they feel has somehow wronged them. And it can manifest itself in very ridiculous ways. And I can put my hand on my heart and say I certainly have. I once got called a fat bastard by someone cycling in the opposite direction because he decided to cut me up on the wrong side of the road. I got home, put my shopping down. I was cycling, I was shopping at the time. Put my shopping down, and I decided I was going to go back out there and see if he was still there. I was going to ask him to roll down his window and say it again to my face. Now, when I went back, he was gone. Unsurprisingly, in retrospect, of course, was he going to hang around for me to come back with some witty retort? Because I laughed. He'd roll down the window and say, "Get out of the way, you fat bastard!" And I cycled off, and I just couldn't help but laugh. It was like, well, yeah, I am fat. What are you going to do about it? But the more I thought about it, the more I simmered on it, the more I boiled on it. And it was like 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'd get home 5 minutes later, I'd jump, get back on my bike and go, and of course he's gone. So we're all prone to these fits of, what was I expecting to do in that situation? If he then calls me a fat bastard, yeah, you are a fat bastard. I'm going to punch him in the face for observing a truth? No. Because what am I supposed to tell the police officer in that situation? Oh, well, he called me fat. And you thought a reasonable response was to follow him and then punch him in the face? Yes. Okay, send him to prison. Or at least put him on remand. And then you lose your job. And then you lose everything else that comes with that. That was fortunate. He'd fucked off. And I think the point Liam Neeson was making was something to that effect, but unfortunately, his choice of words and the rhetoric that he decided to use and frame it under has ultimately betrayed the point I think he was trying to make, and inadvertently he's made a point about something else, which is that the systemic racism that still exists in society, albeit under a different guise, still exists, and it needs combating in sometimes different ways than just saying, oh, racism is wrong. Yeah, we all get it. That's why it's overt instances of racism are rarer and rarer. It's the subjective stuff you need to be worried about. It's the muttered conversations. It's the ignorance. It's the inclusion of everyone based on their character and allowing that diversity to naturally follow, rather than trying to force diversity or hold a picture up that shows diversity even though it doesn't necessarily represent the norm. And these are all very complex topics and very deep-seated and sentimental topics. These are going to have different bearings and different impacts on different people. For me, as a Caucasian, middle-aged now, God, I'm getting old, fuck me, I keep saying the same thing. Just say it. White, middle-aged man, I face different challenges and obstacles than a Asian woman who is younger or older. I face different challenges than a black man who's older or younger or even the same age. And it's the same with every diversity, every ethnicity, every religion. People with different religious dispositions are going to have different challenges than me because of the difference that their religion, the different aspects of their lives that are dictated to by their religion, as opposed to me, who is an atheist. These are all factors, and these are why these topics are so they require a lot of introspection. They require a lot of subjective thought. And social media affords us the easy route. It affords us the opportunity to be children about these things. To simply say, he said this, that makes him a bad person. Never mind the context of the situation, and never mind the fact that he is a human being and prone to making a stupid mistake every now and then. I've seen people say that they're going to ban him from movies. Personally, I think he'll weather the storm. I think Mel Gibson has come off the back end of being an actual racist and done just fine. So I think if Liam Neeson can say, I had a racist thought once, I didn't act on it. Well, I tried, but I couldn't. 40 years ago, mind you. That's 40 years of life, experience, worldviews, I've said experiences, to form a worldview that I now know is better than the one I held before. I think he'll be just fine. it doesn't excuse him, but it does shine a light, to me at least, on how social media is damaging the fabric of how we tackle things, how we tackle these complex subjects, and how it, for lack of a better phrase, brings out the inner child in some people. Because it's easier to shout and point fingers and call fight, 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 than it is to sit down and have a reasonable discussion about these things. It's easy to be the first person to run out into the field and scream to the hundreds of other children, look, so-and-so's going out with so-and-so, than it is to really understand what it is you're talking about before forming an opinion. It's also one of the reasons why I've decided to stay majoritatively off Twitter and off YouTube in terms of a controversial standpoint, because I've come to realise that perhaps my opinions aren't as well informed as I'd like them to be. So maybe I should learn to shut the fuck up. But this is one of those rare occasions where I had an observation in a broader sense that I felt I could substantiate. And I feel like in these two instances that there isn't really a winner or a loser in these debates. I feel like there's two tribes and they're looking to have conflict, but really without understanding what the nature of the conflict is and what the ultimate goal of the conflict is supposed to be. Like kids, because kids don't think further than 5 minutes ahead or when they're hungry. So the point of this show was really to ask you, the listener, to take time to think about the things that affect you, but also to take time to think about things in the wider context. Because I've, over the last few months, had time to have some introspection and tried to look at a more peaceful and serendipitous way of looking at life. And I found it to be incredibly beneficial. Conflict is incited a lot on social media for these reasons, because again, I feel very strongly that it brings out the inner immaturity in people, because it doesn't promote thought, it doesn't promote a diversity of opinion. At least in my eyes it doesn't. Maybe someone could counter that, I'm not sure. But for you, the listener, the person wasting 20 minutes to half an hour of your life on this, and for that I apologise, for not being able to make this point in 140 characters or less. Try and take the time. Try and look at the situation from a broader spectrum and from as many different perspectives as you possibly can before trying to make an opinion on something, because chances are you might land on one of the two sides. But then there's those odd occasions where you might just look at it and go, this is stupid. This whole thing is stupid. It's a waste of time. You're all wasting your time. This is absolutely asinine and ridiculous. Because there is that third option. And it's the adult option. It's the entire world yelling fight, 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 and the two children going at it. You have the choice to be the adult and come in and say, this is fucking stupid. Go back home. Go home. And from the moral perspective, it probably doesn't help things sometimes, because sometimes these battles do need to be fought, and sometimes there are people on the side of wrong and the people on the side of right, and the right need support in order to overcome the argument, because they don't necessarily make their arguments in the best possible way sometimes. Sometimes the wrong argument has the loudest voices. It's entirely possible that's the case. However, the other option is you're being childish. And all I'm saying is perhaps don't be. So, on that note, I'd like to bring this episode of the Veracious Show to a close. I thank you very, very much for having a listen. Please like, share and subscribe. Check out the Halcyon channel. I'm still producing content over there, albeit on a more frequent basis and on a larger scale going forward. So I hope you're watching that. If you're also checking out all the other channels that I typically promote and all the rest of that good jazz. So let's just skip over that and say thank you very much for listening. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all on the next episode of The Veracious Show.